Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 91, maybe it was 92.
Yeah. Okay.
That took over and started doing the newsletter and built it back into a very respectable bulletin. Which I think I did that for 4 or 5 years. I worked with the printer, and we turned out a real quality magazine. And through that, I got back into knowing who the current bands were, and becoming refamiliarized with music.
Not just local bands, but national bands?
National.
Because you
Right,
review,
right.
Have reviews and things, or those are
Right,
concerts.
right. Yeah, and started going to Texas festivals, bluegrass festivals again, basically getting back and becoming more familiar with the music.
What was the association about? How many active members did they have? I guess not
Well,
too many. And what was their mailing list? What was the association?
Actually, the association at that point, and that I got involved on the board and working with the association. At that point, I think the membership was about 400.
Okay.
Uh,
All over the state, or
all over the Central Texas area.
Yeah.
400, all of whom were faceless.
Yes.
They were simply names that we mailed the bulletin to. Why these people belonged to the association, had no idea. The people that you saw at the weekly jams, and the association did more or less sponsor a weekly jam. At one point when I first became involved, it had just moved from Captain Tom's, which was on North Lamar, and was at, I guess, Rudy's Barbecue.
Okay.
Then it eventually moved to...
The one up on 183, the Rudy's up?
No, Ruby's.
Ruby's, okay.
Ruby's, yes. They're on about 29th and roughly, yeah. Then it moved to Art's Rib House, where it still is.
Right.
But the people who would show up at those jams, probably there weren't more than a dozen people who would repeat from jam to jam. Let's see. Yeah, after Captain Tom's, first it went to the farmer's market before it went to Ruby's Barbecue. It was at the farmer's market that I first started going to the jams, and seeing the people who thought that the organization was for them, that is, the pickers.
Yeah.
There were about probably half a dozen consistently.
Just a half a dozen of
Yeah.
the mainstays.
Yeah, of the mainstays. Then maybe a dozen who would fairly frequently show up. But nominally less than 20 people out of 400,
Right.
about 25%.
Yeah.
And the rest of the people were just names.
Right.
You never saw them, you never heard from them. And no matter what I did to editorial comments or articles or whatever, no matter what I did, you'd never hear from the people.
Yeah.
Other than they'd send in their check to renew it.
Right.
So why they were members of the organization, I don't know.
Okay.
The organization per se was formed to promote bluegrass music. It was formed by a group of people who were primarily pickers. The pickers, I think, are more or less satisfied that the organization is doing its job when there is a jam session. if they can go pick at.
Right.
As far as I can tell, most of the pickers don't read the newsletter.
Okay.
You can do a front page article that says Bill Monroe is reborn, and you could mention it to them at the next jam. They'd say, who? Or what? They'd never seen it.
Right.
Or they'd seen it and not read it. But
Yeah.
the pickers are the people who are the most, well, they're the only ones you see. But the many members who never knew what they wanted.
Right.
And I stayed on the board for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. And the organization kept about the same membership. I think we increased probably a few, maybe to 450. But the membership seemed fairly stable, and as I got into doing the 5-string quarterly, which was a more or less commercial venture with the intention of making a profit, but never getting there, just broke even. We decided to discontinue it because we weren't chartered as a non-profit, so we couldn't write off the expenses. So after 2 years, I gave up the 5-string quarterly, but getting involved with that publication, I didn't have the time to do board work. So I felt that I had done my time on the board and let someone else take over. Then last December, November, December, I had kept hearing from people who were on the board that the board meetings weren't, that there wasn't a quorum for them, that there was very little interest, and October, let's see, yeah, I guess it was October, the Bluegrass Association had its at the quarries in northeast Austin.
Oh, they had the parties.
Yeah, they had essentially a membership party in Pitt. And that was also the yearly membership meeting. And at that meeting suggested that it may be time for the organization to give up its charter, but no one seemed to be interested from what I was hearing. Board meetings weren't being attended, and the membership didn't seem to be renewing, that the membership had dropped way down, and that it may be time, if no one's interested in being on the board, if no one is interested in promoting the organization, that the organization simply be let die.
Yeah. This is just last year, last fall.
Yeah, last
Okay.
fall. Then in December, a few of the people who were concerned about the organization and keeping it going had a meeting and recruited enough people to be on the board and asked me if I would be president. Since I started the whole concern, I agreed that if we would work together as a team, and set some real hard goals to rebuild the organization. That I would serve as president, but I wouldn't do everything myself, as the former president had done. If he couldn't find somebody, he'd go out and do it himself.
Yeah.
And since taking over the presidency in January,
Right.
I have really thought hard about what the Bluegrass Association, not only this, but associations across the country are about. And I really have come to believe that there is a divergency, almost a polarity between listeners and pickers. The listeners are fairly, well, I won't say inactive, but fairly passive. They simply want to listen to music. They can't tell you what they want to listen to or what tunes.
Right.
They can tell you what artists they like listening to, but they're not going to tell you how to put a band together, how to run an organization, what to do, when to do it, how to promote it. They simply want, they're consumers. And I think the approach that you were explaining to me as coming from being a consumer is exactly what we need. Most of the bluegrass organizations and associations, including the IBMA and the other bluegrass organizations, Stigma, which is to me similar to the Texas old-time fiddlers. They over-define and restrict. IBMA is coming from the point of view of pure big industry. Certainly there are some efforts within IBMA to make music accessible, to create the history or the museum, the archives, to document the history. But I think the thing that drives IBMA is big record labels. It is, and you use the word industry, and the shading I would put on IBMA, it is commercial industry. While our organization, the Central Texas Bluegrass Association, is a member of IBMA, and certainly in large part we support IBMA. I don't think IBMA is going to help define or promote the traditional music. It's going to promote and define the commercialization of traditional music. That said, I think our organization and many organizations across the country are going to have to really look at their membership. I have looked at our membership, which has declined, where I thought it was maybe 200 when I took over. It really was 100. So from when I first became involved to this time I came back and became re-involved, it went from 400 to 100 membership. Nobody knows who those, well, we know who the people were. We know the names that dropped off the list.
Right.
But why they dropped off, we can even send mailings out and get no response.
Right.
But I really think the polarity, the divergence is between the picker and the listener. What the picker wants is a jam session. you can bring in outside artists and they'll stay away in droves.
And the group has sponsored some concerts, hasn't it, over the years?
Yeah, we have sponsored concerts. We have tried to sponsor festivals. And indeed, we are going to be, one of our first things was looking at the Zilker Festival that the organization had produced for, I think, 12 years at Zilker Park. But with the declining support from the city and the increasing costs of using the park, I looked at it and recommended to the board that we stop doing it. It was producing nothing. We were paying the city. The park was making money, charging $2 for every car that came in, and we were getting nothing out of it. We would gain maybe 1 or 2 memberships.
Yeah.
That was it. So we stopped doing that. We are going to be producing a festival in early November at Old Settlers Park in Round Rock. Round Rock was much more accommodating. When we decided not to do Zilker, they were very receptive, very willing to work with us, very willing to provide us some funding, whereas the city of Austin took the attitude, we have too many requests for our cultural funding monies, so we don't need to listen to you. So, again, we went to a smaller community that is more accessible, that I think is getting at least closer to the personal contact. So, yes, we will be producing a Bluegrass Festival then. The history of the Round Rock Bluegrass Festival has been pretty varied. It started originally with some people who worked for the city wanting to do some bluegrass. They formed the Old Settlers Bluegrass Association and got essentially the involvement of the Central Texas Bluegrass Association to work with them in presenting a festival there. And that happened for several years, and then when Randy Collier became involved, he turned the Round Rock Festival into a much more, well, he wanted bigger audiences, so he started doing some folk, some country, some rock, some jazz, bringing in a lot other performers and trying to bring in other audiences than just bluegrass. So it became what he called it as an acoustic music festival, which also became somewhat electric. And the comments that we did get from Bluegrass Association members, they hated it. When they go to a bluegrass festival, they want bluegrass. They do not want rock and roll. They do not want jazz. Even though Bela Fleck is acknowledged as a great banjo player, they hate his music because it is not bluegrass. So, both Round Rock, when Randy, for whatever the reasons were, Randy and Round Rock parted company, but he took the Old Settlers name to his youth festival. But Round Rock wanted us to produce a true bluegrass festival. Bluegrass artists, not country, not jazz, not rock and roll, but bluegrass. And we're going to do that and see if there is truly a
You're gonna do
bluegrass
this in November?
artist. Pardon?
November?
Yeah, this November. And we're planning on keeping that going. At least we've applied for funds for 2001. Gosh, let's hope it rains.
Yeah, we can, looks like it's getting, it's very dark up there, and I just sort of feel a thunder.
Yeah, man, that's very exciting. Better than bluegrass.
So it sounds like this, your association is still, though, pending an observation of the success of this festival. It still looks like you're, in a sense, running an association for a tiny group of people, really, who, in some ways, I'm not sure all of them deserve an association. You're providing them with a structure that gives them their jam session every
Right.
Sunday, and that's all they want out of you. And you
That's all the pickers want.
Yeah.
But as I say, the pickers are a small minority of the membership. What the membership wants, who knows?
Right.
But they have been dropping off because they weren't getting what they wanted.
Well, I can tell you as a listener, and I'm not a player at all, but I enjoy all sorts of music, and I love to see a lot of music in any setting, whether it be arts or. It's true that there's really no place for me at arts to go and observe the jam if I wanted to. That is comfortable, and certainly not one in which I could feel that I am a part of the group that is putting it on. There's a superiority, and they just don't pay attention to you. If you're there as someone who wants to be, well, you're not in the circle, you're not playing, but you want to be perceived as someone who is more than just a person who happened to drop in for lunch. There's no role for you. Nobody really pays attention to you. You don't have legitimacy as a listener in those things, and I know that I suspect that's felt by other people who show up at some of these things.
I know it is. I know it is. When I go to those jams, I am usually stuck playing the bass.
Right.
And the bass is not an instrument that you can graciously stop playing.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, the rule is only one bass is allowed. You can't have two basses. You got to have one bass. I mean, that's the unwritten law of bluegrass jam. And if you're playing bass, until another bass player shows up who indicates that he or she is willing to play, if you will let them play, you can't quit. And I see people come in, and where do I sit? What do I do? They're very ill at ease. And I have urged other people to be meeters and greeters, and sometimes, particularly when there's another bass player, I will do that. I will say, gee, I haven't seen you around. Are you from here? Are you a player? Do you like to listen? But I think you have hit the nail on the head, and I know you're trying to get information from me.
Yeah.
But I would say there's a place for you.
Oh, I would say 6 chairs that are for jam watchers.
No, the place for you is on the board.
Oh, right.
No, seriously, if you would consider that, I think you're coming from a direction and an appreciation of music that is not well represented. And I think you, as a board member of the association,
I'd consider that. Let's talk about it later.
Okay. No, what?
I'm serious. I mean, I like to, I wouldn't mind actually just encountering some folks who have shared affinities and stuff.
Okay.
But But that's true. I mean, I've gone down there and watched for a while and then gone away. There's no place for me to put my body that is comfortable. It's like, do you want to be seated for
Yeah.
lunch? Well, not really, and I don't want to be
No,
seated for lunch
right.
by myself. And I, you know, there's no place to sit where you just want to watch the music. So if you want to see some informal picking, which is done in a public place on a Sunday, you're in an awkward situation.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Just because you like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's a...
Now, it's a completely different atmosphere down at Harwood.
Uh-huh.
But that's a trip.
And you're in a theater,
You
though,
gotta-
right? You said you're in a theater?
No,
Oh, no. Oh, no.
community center.
Okay, but it's is it a place with a stage and seats?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 It's got seats.
That's audience directed.
Yeah.
It manages to do both. Obviously,
Right,
it's for a
right.
community that wants to participate,
Right.
but it is done for an audience.
Right.
Whereas bluegrass jams and old time jams, those informal things in parks and restaurants, those are done for the players and
For
like
the
no one
players,
else.
for the players.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, I really am a player and a listener.
Yeah.
When I go to a bluegrass festival, I don't want to play. I want to hear
Yeah.
what the other people
Sure.
play. You know, I want to hear what the lineup is.
Yeah.
Whereas most of the people, particularly from here, that go to festivals, well, aren't you going to play, John?
Uh-huh.
Why should I travel 100 miles and spend $50 a night on a motel room to play with the same people that I play with in Austin? I came here for the music, to learn, to listen, not to play. But
Well, I've also heard of people talking proudly about the fact that they go to festivals now and they trumpet, they like it. Oh, I've gone to 3 festivals this summer or more. It's gotten larger.
Mhm.
Some people I've talked to,
Yeah.
and I never know who's on stage. I like sitting in the camping area or the parking lot and playing with all these different amateurs that come by. I'll move from circle to circle, and you can't. Who headlines the festival? I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a point of pride.
it's a point of pride, and I think it exactly defines the problem I see in the music. You have 2 constituencies, pickers and players. And that is...
Pickers and players?
pickers and listeners.
Right.
And certainly that is the problem that I am wrestling with as president of the Bluegrass Association. And in trying to help the association determine what it's going to do. To me, the association has an incredible potential if it can define its mission. If it can say, this is what we're about, and this is what we're going to do, then we can go out and start raising funds to do it.
Is there a distinction between bluegrass players or informal bluegrass players and informal old-time players that you see, something that is kind of clear-cut and appreciated by people in those circles?
It's not clear-cut, and it's not, it may be appreciated, but it certainly is not discussed.
Okay.
The Austin Friends of Traditional Music and the Bluegrass Association probably should have much, much more interchange. Yet, I have sensed, ever since I've been involved, that bluegrassers don't like traditional music people, and vice versa. And why? I don't know. I have never been able to get anyone who takes a hardline stance against the other to really talk about it. But yes, I sense that tension.
But no way you can put your finger on what's...
Well, I can
like
hypothesize, and I considered it, and I think it is simply the fact that bluegrass is fairly defined. There is a body of literature, if you want to call it that. You can hear something that is bluegrass, and that's bluegrass. Whereas you can hear something that's so-called traditional music, and is that traditional music? I mean, it's not, to me, traditional includes bluegrass. But the bluegrass territory seems to be staked out, and we don't want anybody else claiming it. So pull your boundary of traditional back and don't include us.
Or old time as opposed to traditional old time.
Yeah, old time. I mean, there are so many labels. I don't know the difference between old time and traditional. And to me, traditional should include bluegrass, except bluegrass was created at a specific point in time which was relatively modern. So maybe it isn't traditional. And what is old time? Well, bluegrass isn't old time, but when did old time begin? You know, by the time you began considering all the word games and the definitions, you've forgotten about music.
Yeah. Well,
and
Sharon,
dealing with etymology.
well, you know, and Sharon had an observation. It's an interesting observation. I'm curious whether or not you find it a true observation. She thought that people who consider themselves old-time music aficionados as opposed to bluegrass aficionados, the old-timies, she said she thought they contained a greater percentage of people who more consciously cultivated old-timey things in other aspects of their lives. She thinks you are more likely to go to an old-time jam and see, conscious fashion, straight hats and ties than you would at a bluegrass jam.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go, she believes if you go to their homes, if they had a little money, you'd more consciously see, you know, the conscious creation of a lifestyle than you would at a bluegrass picker's home. And I don't know if you think there's any truth to that at all, at any level, but it was an interesting thought.
I haven't really thought about it, but now that you mention it, yes, I remember people in costumes much more at old-time gatherings.
Right.
They are trying to look the part. In bluegrass, and unfortunately, many venues have characterized bluegrass audiences as cheap.
Yeah.
They will spend many, many dollars on instruments. They will spend many, many dollars on RVs. But when they go to a restaurant, if they tip 10%, it's a lot. And indeed, at the various restaurants that we have had performances, particularly at Arts, where I have gotten to know the several wait staff over the years, a lot of them hate to work Sundays simply because they don't get any tips from the bluegrass, or they don't get any reasonable tips from the bluegrass crowd. And I've seen that and heard that from other places where restaurants, bars that have had bluegrass performances.
Yeah.
Indeed, I was trying to book, find a venue for a September performance. Doyle Lawson wants to bring his group here. He's got a date in Oklahoma and then again in North Texas, and looking for something in between to fill up a day or so. And trying to find a venue to book that. You know, one of the comments from one of the venues was, well, that's great. I hope it's raining north. One of the comments was, if the date were open for us, we probably still wouldn't book it because we won't do any bar business with the bluegrass crowd.
Well, interesting. That surprises me, actually.
Which is very different. In Texas, bluegrass audiences are very, wow, that's great. Tend to be very Christian oriented, tend to be almost teetotalers, tend to be against any drugs. There is a much more rigid conformance required in Texas than I experienced in the Northeast. Of course, I was in the Northeast in the 60s and 70s when things were a little freer all over, but you know, nobody was really concerned about drinking or drugs, or as long as you were enjoying the music, whether you were listening or playing. Right. And I believe certainly there were many more listeners than pickers in the Northeast. Whereas here, the people who rule are the pickers.
Now, is that true, what you said about teetotaling, the Austin players, like those who congregated arts and stuff? Is that,
they're not teetotalers, but the same people who will have a beer at Arts will be very adamant at having beer at the festival. They will go into their RV and they will drink the beer. But they do not want anybody having a beer bottle in their hand. That was one of the problems the bluegrass people had with Randy's festival, Old Settlers Festival. Beer company was a sponsor, and that just isn't bluegrass. Well, and certainly coming from the Northeast, having been through that whole era of freedom, I believe that as long as people are not intruding on other people, do what you want. It doesn't bother me, but wrestling with this almost it's an ultra-conservative attitude that imposes something on the music that, well, I guess Monroe would have imposed it because he was definitely an authoritarian. But I think it destroys, or it doesn't destroy, but it keeps a lot of people away from the music simply because it is identified as ultra-religious or ultra-conservative.
Now, it's interesting, I came out of almost 20 years in Northern California before I got here in 95. And I don't know if you're familiar with this. I mean, bluegrass in Northern California was for hippies.
Bluegrass came out of the Graham Parsons, Chris Hillman era.
Bluegrass in California really doesn't have much to do with the South, but certainly not the gospel South or anything like that. That's an interesting. So it's surprising to me to hear what you're saying, simply because it's not a scene that I know. In San Francisco, bluegrassers would gather at a place called Paul's Saloon, which was kind of the home of local regular bluegrass, and drink a lot. And when they weren't in Paul's Saloon, they'd toke a lot. That's
Yeah.
what the players would do, that's what the audience would do.
That's, I think the Northeast, where I came from, is not quite as open as California, but, Chris Hillman and Graham Carson, Graham, who I think is, again, he's not a bluegrass musician, but I think his music was probably some of the most innovative American music, had he not died of an overdose
real early.
But, I mean, the story of that whole overdose and what they did with his body and tried to cremate it. And, I mean, it's a wonderful story. And we don't have that kind of outrageous performers in bluegrass yet.
Well, even, Hot Rods was considered sort of a progressive band. And people, Brian, I understand, is a stoner.
Oh, yeah.
Like that,
Well, I think when you really get down to it, probably some of the best bluegrass performances are opened up, if not inspired by some kind of drug, whether it be alcohol or something else. But
festival that you don't speak about it.
in Texas, that is for both. And there are some very good Texas festivals. Coshada, I think, is one of the more traditional. They do not allow electric instruments, except when the New Tradition plays, which New Tradition uses an electric bass, but somehow they overlook that. But Coshada is absolutely adamant about alcohol and drugs. And most of the festivals, whether they enforce it or not, on their flyers you will see absolutely no alcoholic beverages or drugs. And I think it's probably the same thing you see in religion. There is a much more conservative attitude here in Texas than I certainly experienced in the Northeast and you experienced in California.
And the players that come together around the organization activities, which I guess is unlimited to the arts and the quarries periodically.
Well, art quarries, Harwood, Pearl, there are probably...
Well, is the association involved in Harwood and Pearl at all? They're not?
They're in the Central Texas area, yes. They're not official. We're not the official sponsor, but certainly I try to help them out. Ben Buchanan, who's one of our board members, is pretty much in charge of Harwood. Basically, it's an informal, mutual support.
Well, I guess where I was going is, do people, are these folks, like the folks who gather at arts or the quarries, or the folks that play around association activities consciously, are they consumers? Do they talk about records? Do they talk about... No, okay.
No. The pickers will talk about a very few select group of hot licks performers.
That's it, but they don't go out and buy bluegrass records.
They don't go out and
buy new.
They do not listen. They do not buy a range of music.
Now, do you read Bluegrass Unlimited?
No.
Okay. All right. I mean, because you get that each month, and there's 30 reviews.
Yeah.
Every single month. I'm picking a number out of that, but that's probably close to reality. It's about 30 reviews, and they've got their charts, their bluegrass charts. That's what's hot in bluegrass radio and in the stores that they survey, and and they don't buy these things. I mean, the hottest record I'd say is bluegrass. with Ron Vincent's record has been really high. Nobody in the association would necessarily know anything at all about that.
No.
Interesting.
None of the pickers.
Uh-huh.
I don't read Bluegrass Unlimited simply because I kept seeing the same old reviews time after time after time. Same bands.
Right, sure.
I mean, there's a roster of bands. They seem to rotate.
Well, certainly in the feature articles,
Yeah.
right. The reviews, I think, are probably more broad,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the feature articles, of course, they run through, and they start again.
My feeling is that IBMA, Bluegrass Unlimited, which are probably the two largest organizations, one for-profit, the other not-for-profit, speaking for bluegrass, really do not speak for the traditional music. I don't think anyone really has identified what bluegrass music is, other than how we're going to sell it. Rounder, as you were saying, I think probably has a feeling, but they can't define it.
Right. And they're hardly traditional, although
Yeah.
they put out very hardcore traditional stuff.
My interest in the music is first and foremost, I think, as an educator. It is a way that interesting music can be made accessible to performers and listeners. I see too many kids go through UIL music, learning how to play a violin. They're